The dining hall was full of sound, full of voices, full of laughter. But at the far corner of the wide room, silence lived. She sat there, a small alien girl, shoulders bent, her plate untouched, her eyes fixed on the table as if the floor itself was more welcoming than the people around her. Others avoided her corner. They carried trays of food past her, whispering, giggling, shaking their heads. To them, she was not one of them. She was not clean. She was not worthy. Her family name carried shame, a mark of bad blood, and because of this, she was forced to sit alone. The colony believed her presence was a curse, her touch poison, her breath unlucky. Even the young ones, who should not yet know cruelty, copied the whispers of their parents. They threw crumbs near her seat, not to share, but to mock. Her small hands shook as she lifted a spoon, but before she could take a bite, she felt the burning stares on her back. The weight of them pressed down until she set the spoon back down. Her hunger pushed deeper inside. It was easier not to eat than to endure their eyes. So she lowered her head and sat still, pretending not to feel. At the same time, the heavy doors at the front of the hall opened. A new figure walked in, his step steady, his gaze curious. It was a human, newly assigned to the colony as a worker, his clothes simple, his eyes sharp. He was used to crowds, used to noise, but as he stepped inside, he noticed something strange. One side of the room was alive with chatter, but one corner was empty, abandoned, except for her. His gaze locked on the girl, and for a moment, he did not understand. Why was she alone? Why did no one sit with her? The human collected his food, moving through the line, his ears catching whispers. "Stay away from her," one alien murmured to another. "She carries the stain of her family," another warned. "Even to look at her for too long is bad luck," a third said. The human frowned, his grip tightening on his tray. He had seen cruelty before, back on Earth, but something about this felt different. This was not just unkindness. This was law, silent but strong. He walked slowly, scanning the tables, his steps unsure. Every seat was filled, every group loud with laughter except for one. The lonely corner where the alien girl sat frozen. Her hands trembled as she tried again to lift her spoon. She wanted to disappear, but she could not. And then she felt it. A shadow falling across her table, her eyes lifted wide and startled. The human had stopped, staring at her with a question in his eyes. For a second, the girl's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. She expected him to sneer, to laugh, to walk away like the others. But instead, he lingered, his gaze steady, almost angry. She dropped her eyes quickly, whispering under her breath, "Do not sit here, please. It will bring you trouble." Her voice was almost a ghost, so quiet only he could hear it. The human did not answer. Not yet. He studied her, the way her shoulders curled inwards, the way her hands hid behind the tray as if protecting herself. Something twisted in his chest, a spark of anger and something else, something like pity. The hall grew quieter as others noticed him standing there. Whispers spread like fire. Is he going to sit with her? No, he would not dare. He is new. He does not know. The human heard them, but he did not move, not yet. He let the tension build, his eyes still locked on the girl who could not even meet his gaze. She felt her cheeks burn, her heart race. Why was he staring? Why would he risk himself? The human clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to act. It was not yet the right time, but he knew one thing for certain. This girl was not cursed, she was not unclean. She was simply alone. And something inside him whispered that her story was only beginning. The girl gripped her spoon tighter, waiting for him to leave, but deep in her chest a fragile hope stirred, a question she dared not ask. Would this human be different? Or would he break her heart like the rest? The silence stretched heavy as stone, and in that silence both of them knew. The colony's cruel rules would soon be tested, and nothing in that hall would remain the same. The human left the dining hall that night with a weight on his chest. He had not sat with her, not yet, but her lonely image burned in his mind. Her eyes lowered, her plate untouched, her voice a whisper begging him not to sit. It haunted him, and he needed to know why. The next day, while working in the colony's fields, he asked questions. He was careful, pretending to be casual, but every answer cut deeper than the last. One worker shrugged, saying, "She is cursed blood, do not get near." Another spat on the ground, muttering, "Her ancestors betrayed us, her family's shame still follows her." The human frowned, trying to understand. "But she is just a girl," he said. The alien's eyes hardened. "The rule is older than her, older than me, older than you." That night, he listened more closely in the hall. The whispers flowed like poisoned water. They called her a shadow, a stain, a reminder of old wounds. No one dared touch her, sit with her, or even let her walk too close. If she brushed against someone, they would shake off her touch as if it burned. Children were warned not to play near her. Merchants refused to sell her the best goods, giving her only scraps at higher prices. The human's fists clenched every time he heard their words. But he stayed quiet, learning, listening, watching. He wanted to see how far their cruelty went. And soon he saw more. On the third evening, he watched from the far side of the hall. The alien girl carried her tray slowly, her hands trembling. She avoided everyone, slipping through the crowd like smoke. She reached her lonely corner. But before she sat down, a young alien boy laughed. He stretched his leg, and she stumbled, her food spilling across the floor. The hall erupted in laughter, cruel and sharp. Her face burned red, but she said nothing, not a word. She bent down, gathering the pieces quietly, as if this humiliation was nothing new. The human rose halfway, ready to step in. But something stopped. Him? Her eyes filled with shame, but also something harder, something stronger. She picked up her tray, dusted off what little food she could save, and walked to her corner. Not a single protest came from the hall. No one defended her. No one spoke against the cruelty. It was as if silence itself was the law. Later, he asked an elder worker about it. The old alien shook his head. "You do not understand, human." He leaned closer, his voice low. "It is not only her. It is the rule of the colony. Those of cursed blood must sit apart, must eat alone, must live apart." "Why?" the human demanded. "Because the past must never be forgotten," the elder whispered. "Her ancestors betrayed us to outsiders, and the blood remembers." The human's jaw tightened, but she did nothing. The elder's eyes narrowed. "It does not matter. The rule is older than her life, older than yours. Break it, and you risk the wrath of the council." The human lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. He thought about Earth, about how humans also carried scars of hatred. But here, it was sharper, more unchallenged. It was not only cruelty, it was tradition, carved deep into the bones of the colony. And yet he remembered her trembling voice, her quiet warning, her loneliness. He thought of the boy who had tripped her, and the laughter that followed. He thought of the silence that was worse than any insult. The next evening he entered the hall again. This time he did not walk toward her, not yet. He sat with the others, listening as they joked, as they sneered at her. One alien muttered, "I heard her mother begged for scraps in the dirt." Another chuckled. "Her father ran like a coward in battle, his blood stains her face." The human felt fire rise in his chest, but he forced himself to stay still. Every insult carved the truth deeper into his heart. They would never stop on their own. Someone would have to break the silence. The girl sat in her corner again, small, fragile, her spoon untouched. But her eyes, when she glanced up for only a second, met his. There was no hope in them, only fear, only warning. She knew what he was thinking, and her gaze begged him not to do it, not to risk himself for her, not to challenge the rules that even she obeyed. The human turned back to his food, but his heart was no longer quiet. He knew the silent rules now. He knew the law of this colony, but he also knew something else. Laws built on cruelty deserve to be broken, and he was already preparing to do what no one else dared. The dining hall was crowded again, voices rising like waves, laughter bouncing off the walls. But the human walked in with a different fire in his chest. For days he had watched her sit alone. For days he had listened to whispers. For days he had seen her suffer in silence. Tonight, something inside him refused to stay still. He carried his tray, his eyes fixed not on the empty seats of the hall, but on the lonely corner where she sat. The alien girl lifted her head for only a moment, and when she saw him coming, her heart froze. Her spoon slipped from her fingers, clattering against the plate. No one ever walked toward her corner, not even by mistake. Yet here he was, the human, moving with steady steps, not hesitating, not turning aside. Whispers started almost instantly, rolling through the hall like thunder before a storm. "Look where he's going," one alien hissed. "He doesn't know." Another said, "No, he knows and he's mad." Someone else added, their voice trembling with shock. The girl's breath quickened, her hands shook, she whispered under her breath, "No, please don't." But the human did not stop. He reached her corner, placed his tray on the table, and sat down across from her. The hall fell silent, every voice cut off at once. The only sound was the clink of his spoon against the plate, steady, calm, deliberate. It was as if he was daring them all to react. The girl's wide eyes filled with fear. "You cannot. They will punish you," she whispered quickly, her voice trembling. Her words shook with warning, but also with something else, something close to hope. The human looked at her directly, his gaze sharp but warm. "Then let them," he said simply, his voice low but strong. She froze, unable to reply, unable to understand why he would risk himself for her. Around them, the whispers exploded into chaos. "He's cursed now," one voice cried. "Foolish human," another spat. "He sits with filth," the harshest voice shouted. But none of it reached him. He kept eating as if their words meant nothing. And for the first time, someone sat across from the girl. Someone met her eyes without disgust. Her chest tightened, tears pricked her eyes. But she forced them back, afraid that, if she cried, the moment would break. A guard at the door shifted uneasily, looking toward the elders' seats. The elders sat frozen in shock, their faces twisted with anger. One of them slammed his fist on the table. "This cannot be allowed," he barked. But even as he shouted, some of the younger aliens looked on with wide, uncertain eyes. They had never seen anyone defy the silent rule, never seen anyone break the chain, and in their silence a seed was planted. The girl tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You must move, please, before they hurt you." But the human only shook his head, chewing calmly. His defiance was not loud, it was not violent, but it was stronger than any shout. He did not fight with fists, he fought with presence. By sitting there, he had already broken their greatest law. The hall buzzed with rising tension. The crowd split between rage and disbelief. The human leaned forward slightly, his voice low so only she could hear. "You are not cursed," he said. "You are not dirty. Do you understand?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her heart pounded in her chest. No one had ever said those words to her. No one had ever dared. And though she feared what would come, part of her wanted to believe him. One alien youth stood up angrily, pointing a finger. "You bring danger on all of us," he shouted at the human. But the human looked up, his eyes like steel. "Danger comes from lies, not from her," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. Gasps echoed. Even the guards stiffened. The girl's breath caught in her throat. His words were a hammer against the wall that had caged her all her life. The elders rose at last, their voices sharp. "Enough," one growled. "This human will face judgment," another declared. But the human only finished his bite, calmly placing his spoon down. He had chosen his side, he had drawn the line, and though the girl trembled with fear deep inside her chest, something stirred. For the first time, she was not completely alone. The hall, once full of laughter, now buzzed with storm. Every eye watched the table in the corner. The human sat in defiance. The girl sat in shock. And the colony knew nothing would be the same again. The moment the human sat at the lonely table, the hall turned into a storm. At first, there was only silence, the kind of silence that squeezes the air from the chest. But then came the voices, loud, sharp, furious. "He has cursed himself," one shouted. "He has broken the law." Another cried. Some stood up from their seats, pointing, whispering, warning, their eyes filled with fear. The girl lowered her head, trembling so badly her spoon rattled against the plate. She wanted to beg him again to move, to leave before it was too late, but her throat was frozen. The elders at the far table slammed their hands against the wood. Their voices rose like thunder. "Human, you will rise at once," one commanded. "You will not spread your defiance. In this sacred place," another barked. But the human did not move. He lifted his spoon calmly, took another bite, and chewed slowly. His eyes were steady, daring them to enforce their law. The hall gasped, the sound rolling across the tables, like a wave. No one had ever ignored the elders before, not in front of the whole colony. The guards shifted uneasily near the doors, waiting for orders. Children peeked out from behind their parents, their eyes wide with shock and curiosity. Some of the younger aliens whispered to each other, voices filled not only with fear but with something else, something like wonder. "Why is he not afraid?" one asked. "Why would he sit with her?" Another murmured. The older aliens hissed at them to stay silent, to respect the law, but the questions had already been planted. The girl's hands clenched into fists on her lap, her heart pounding. Painfully, she wanted to scream, to tell him to leave, but a small spark lit inside her chest. No one had ever stood beside her. No one had ever risked anything for her, and though fear still weighed heavy, that spark burned quietly, refusing to die. The elders shouted again, their faces red with rage. "You shame yourself, human," one thundered. "You spit on our history." Another growled. The human finally looked up, his voice calm but cutting. "History should not be chains," he said, his words clear and sharp. Gasps filled the hall, some with anger, some with awe. The girl's lips parted in shock. No one had ever spoken like this. No one had dared to question the ancient rules. One alien male, younger than the rest, stood suddenly, his fists tight. "If you sit with her, then you sit against all of us," he shouted. The hall trembled with murmurs of agreement, but also with murmurs of doubt. The human looked at him directly, unflinching. "Then all of you are wrong," he said. His words struck like a blade, cutting through the noise. The younger alien faltered, his rage cracking into hesitation. No one had ever spoken back so boldly, and yet the human did it without raising his voice. The guards finally stepped forward, their hands on their weapons. The girl gasped softly, fear racing through her veins. Would they drag him away, beat him, kill him for this defiance? But the human did not move. He sat as if the entire hall was powerless against him. His calmness unsettled the guards, who glanced toward the elders, waiting for the order. The elders hesitated, sensing the shifting mood in the hall. If they punished him too harshly, would it plant even more questions in the younger minds? The colony's unity was shaking, and the crack had come from one human, sitting at one lonely table. The girl looked up at him at last, her voice trembling. Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Her question was small, but the silence around them made it echo. The human turned his eyes to her, steady and kind. "Because no one deserves to eat alone," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight heavier than stone. The girl's breath caught, tears filling her eyes. In that moment, she felt something she had not felt in years. Dignity. The uproar raged on, voices clashing like steel, elders shouting, guards waiting, families whispering, children staring. But the colony could not undo what had already been done. The law had been broken, not in secret, but in front of every eye. And though punishment was promised, though danger was close, the human's act could not be erased. The girl sat straighter, her trembling easing just a little. Her corner was no longer empty, her table was no longer lonely, and the colony, shaken to its core, knew that change had already begun. The next morning the colony buzzed with noise, whispers flying from street to street, from house to house. The human's act in the dining hall had shaken the ground beneath them, and no one could stop talking about it. Some called him brave, others called him reckless, but all agreed on one thing. The elders would not let it pass. The law had been broken, and the punishment would come. The girl walked quietly through the market, her head low as always. But today the stares burned even hotter. Some hissed at her as she passed, blaming her for the human's defiance. "It is her fault," one voice said. "She tempted him into shame." Another muttered, "She carries ruin wherever she goes." The words cut her like knives, but this time something inside her refused to collapse. She remembered his steady voice, his calm defiance, his words, "Because no one deserves to eat alone." For the first time, she held her head a little higher. That evening, the guards came for him. Their armor clattered as they entered his quarters, their faces grim. "You are summoned," one said, his tone sharp and cold. The human did not resist. He rose with steady steps, his jaw tight but his eyes calm. The girl saw him being led through the streets, and her heart nearly broke. Whispers followed them, some full of satisfaction, some heavy with fear. Children stared wide-eyed as the guards marched him toward the council chamber. Inside the chamber, the air was thick with tension. The elders sat in a circle, their robes heavy, their faces like stone. The guards shoved the human forward, forcing him to stand in the center. The eldest elder spoke first, his voice echoing in the chamber. "You have broken our law, human. You have insulted our ancestors. You have brought danger to our people." The others nodded, their eyes flashing with anger. "What do you say for yourself?" the elder demanded. The human's voice was calm, steady, carrying across the chamber. "I say your law is not justice," he said. Gasps filled the room. Guards shifted uneasily, but he continued, "It is cowardice. It is cruelty. It is fear dressed as tradition." The elders roared in outrage. One slammed his hand on the table. "Silence," he shouted, but the human did not fall silent. "You punish her for blood she never spilled. You shame her for sins she never committed. You force her to live as less than nothing, and you call that honor." The girl, who had slipped inside the chamber unnoticed, trembled as she listened. Her heart pounded as his words struck through the heavy air. The elders pointed at him with fury. "You dare mock us, outsider. You dare question laws older than your world." The human looked at them with unflinching eyes. "Yes," he said simply, "because cruelty should not live forever." The hall erupted in chaos, elders shouting, guards moving forward. The girl could no longer stay silent. Her small voice cracked through the noise. "If he is guilty, then so am I," she said. The room froze, all eyes turning toward her. Her body shook, but she stood straighter than ever before. "I ate with him," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I did not stop him. I did not rise. I sat with him, so punish me too." Gasps filled the chamber, some from shock, some from disbelief. The guards looked uncertain, waiting for orders. The elders' fury grew hotter, their voices clashing like thunder. "She admits it," one elder shouted. "She must be punished as well." Another growled, but among the younger aliens who had gathered at the edges of the chamber, whispers spread like sparks in dry grass. "She spoke," one said in awe. "She stood up," another whispered. For years she had been silent, bowed, broken, but now she stood beside him. The eldest elder finally raised his hand, silencing the room. His voice was heavy with rage. "Then so be it. Both will face punishment." The guard stepped forward, ready to seize them, but the human's voice rang out again, sharp and strong. "Punish us if you dare, but know this, every chain you place, every blow you strike, it will only prove your fear." His words struck like iron, and though the elders tried to cover it with more shouting, the damage was done. Doubt had entered the chamber, and doubt was more dangerous than any weapon. The girl's eyes met the human's, fear and courage clashing inside her. For the first time, she realized she was not standing in shame. She was standing in defiance. And though punishment was certain, though danger was near, she felt something she had never felt before. She felt free. The punishment had been declared, but the colony did not return to silence. Instead, the air grew heavier with whispers, doubt spreading like cracks in old stone. The human and the girl were locked away for the night, kept under watch, but their voices had already escaped into the streets. And by morning, the colony was divided. Some still clung to the ancient law, muttering that the elders must be obeyed. They spat on the ground when her name was spoken. They cursed the human for daring to defy tradition. But others, especially the young, felt something shift inside them. They remembered the sight of him sitting at her table, calm against the storm. They remembered her small, trembling voice, daring to speak in front of the council. It had planted a seed in their hearts, a dangerous growing seed. The girl sat in the dim cell, her knees pulled close to her chest, her head resting against the cold wall. She had lived her whole life as if she were invisible. She had accepted the cruel law, believing she was too weak to fight. But now, things were different. Her voice had broken free, and the sound of it still echoed in her mind. I ate with him, so punish me too, she whispered to herself, almost in disbelief. Her heart raced at the memory, a mix of fear and pride. The human sat across the cell, his back straight, his gaze steady. He studied her quietly, and finally said, "You were brave." She shook her head quickly. "No, I was afraid." "Courage is not the absence of fear," he replied gently. "It is choosing to stand even while you tremble." His words wrapped around her like warmth in the cold. For the first time in years, she felt her voice mattered. Outside, the colony boiled with argument. In the market, some shouted that the girl must be cast out once and for all, but others whispered, "Why must she suffer for what her ancestors did?" A young alien woman muttered, "I never believed the curse anyway." Another added, "If the law is just, why do we fear questions?" The old ways were cracking, and every whisper made the cracks wider. That night, the elders met in secret. They feared the unrest, feared that the humans' defiance had ignited something they could not control. "We must make an example of them," one elder hissed. "If we do not, the young will think tradition is weak." Another growled, but even among the elders, there was unease. They could feel the colony slipping. From their grip in the cell, the girl dared to ask the question that had been burning inside her. Why did you sit with me?" she whispered, her voice fragile. The human looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because you deserve more than loneliness," he said. She blinked, her throat tight, her chest aching. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not once in her life. For the first time, she began to believe she was not cursed, not broken, but simply a victim of lies. When the guards brought them to the hall the next day, the crowd was larger than ever. Every eye was fixed on them, every voice buzzing with conflict. The elders stood tall, ready to condemn. But before they could speak, a young alien male from the crowd shouted, "Why must she be punished?" Gasps echoed. The elders' faces twisted with fury. Another voice rose, "She has done nothing wrong." More whispers followed, louder this time. No longer just whispers, but questions, real questions. The awakening had begun. The girl felt her knees weaken, her chest trembling. Never before had anyone spoken in her defense. Never before had voices risen for her. The human stood calmly beside her, his presence like a wall of stone. He leaned slightly toward her and murmured, "Listen, they are beginning to see." Her heart pounded, her eyes burning with tears. For the first time, she believed change was possible. The elders shouted for silence, demanded obedience. But the crowd no longer bowed as quickly as before. Some looked at each other with doubt in their eyes. Some clenched their fists as if weighing rebellion. And deep inside, the girl felt something awaken fully. The chains of shame that had bound her heart began to crack. She was not only the cursed one, not only the shadow in the corner, she was someone worth standing for. And the human's defiance had given her the courage to finally stand with him. The hall buzzed with unrest. The elders fought to maintain control. But the colony had already changed. The awakening had begun, and nothing would stop it. The colony's great hall was filled to its edges. Every seat taken, every corner crowded, voices rose and fell like a storm, anger and fear clashing with whispers of courage. The human and the girl stood together in the center, watched by hundreds of eyes. The elders sat on their raised seats, their robes heavy, their faces dark with rage. They believed they still held control, but the air told a different story. The air was alive, trembling with change. The eldest elder struck his staff against the floor, demanding silence. "You all know why we are here," he thundered. "This human has broken our sacred law, and this cursed child has stood with him. They must be punished, or our traditions will crumble." Some in the crowd shouted agreement, their voices sharp. But others looked at each other, uncertain, whispering. Doubts the elders had ruled for generations without question, but now questions filled the air. The girl's knees felt weak, but she stood tall, her hands trembling at her sides. She remembered the years of eating alone, the years of silence, the years of shame. And then she looked at the human standing beside her, calm, steady, unbroken. His presence gave her strength. His defiance had already shaken the walls of her prison. Her chest rose with a breath that felt like fire. For the first time, she felt her voice could matter. The human spoke first, his words calm but sharp. "You call it law," he said, "but it is only fear. You punish the innocent for the sins of the dead. You keep your people chained to lies." Gasps filled the hall, some with fury, some with awe. The elders slammed their fists against the table. "Silence," they roared. But the human's voice carried over theirs. "You claim strength, but strength does not fear truth. Strength does not shun a child." The girl's heart pounded, and before she could stop herself, she spoke. Her voice shook, but it carried. "I am not cursed," she said. The hall went still, the crowd leaning forward. "I am not dirt, I am not shame, I am only me," she cried, her voice cracking but growing louder. The silence that followed was heavy, her words hanging in the air like sparks before flame. The younger aliens in the crowd began to stir. One shouted, "She is right." Another called, "Why should we hate her for something she never did?" The elders roared for order, their faces red with fury. But the voices rose louder, stronger, no longer whispers but shouts. The hall trembled with argument, the colony tearing itself apart. The guards stepped forward, uncertain whether to seize the human and the girl or to hold back. Their eyes flickered between the elders and the restless crowd. If they acted, the crowd might turn against them. For the first time, the power of the elders felt fragile. The human stood tall. His eyes scanning the hall, he saw the doubt, the unrest, the awakening in their faces. And he knew the old order was breaking. The eldest elder shouted again, his voice shaking, "If you let this continue, we lose everything." But a voice from the crowd answered back, clear and strong, "Then maybe it is time we lose it." The hall erupted, voices clashing like thunder. The elders pounded their fists, the guards faltered, the people shouted. The colony was no longer united under fear. It was divided, and division was the beginning of change. The girl's eyes filled with tears. But this time they were not tears of shame. She looked at the human, whispering, "You did this." He shook his head gently. "No, you did. You stood." Her chest tightened, her voice breaking. "I could never have done it alone." He placed a steady hand on the table between them, his gaze firm. "Then you will never be alone again," he said. The uproar raged around them, the colony in chaos. But in the center of the storm, the girl and the human stood together, unbroken. The old laws had cracked. The council's power trembled. The colony had been shaken, and nothing would ever return to what it was. For the first time, the girl believed in tomorrow, not as a shadow, not as the cursed one, but as someone who belonged. And beside her stood the human, the defiance that had set her free.